Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Human Experience. This is your girl, Rashida, aka Righteous Sun. And on today's episode, I'm really excited to have on Anthony Abbagnano. He's a breathwork healer and founder of Alchemy of Breath. We're so excited to have him here. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Yes, share with family and friends and those who you feel will vibe with this message. With that being said, let's get into it.
Hi, Rashida. Thanks
Ooh,
so much for welcoming me.
thank you. Thank you, Anthony. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm excited. I'm
Yeah,
curious, excited.
absolutely. Um, I'm always open to hearing what other people's journeys look like and how they got to where they are today. So you are not only a breathwork expert, but a facilitator, and you are the founder of the Alchemy of Breath. So we all know that like as breath, it just happens without us even having to think, right? So many of my practitioner friends and even myself were always like, if you want to get out of thought, just focus on breath. And I think that's something that so many of us forget to do because we're so in thought. And in some cases, sometimes, which I just had a friend say to me the other day, that like sometimes we don't even recognize where our breath is coming from. Sometimes it could be so shallow, it's up in our chest because we're feeling stressed. Or sometimes it's down in that solar plexus, which we're always saying, like, breathe through there. But she also mentioned that we even forget to breathe through the root, right? To bring all of that energy down so that we can ground ourselves. So I would love to just hear all about Anthony and how you got to be a breath work expert and facilitator.
Thank you. Well, it's been a long journey. I think the first time I became aware of the power of the breath was when I was about 8 years old, and it was impressed upon me by someone else. They gave me a paper bag to breathe into, and he told me to breathe 20 deep breaths, so I did. And then he let me down to the ground, and I had when they say I saw stars, I think that's one way of explaining it. Another way of explaining my experience might be what you read about in near-death experiences, that I felt an utter peace, and I wasn't a peaceful child. I wasn't a happy child. So, um, for all the difficulties that I was faced with, this experience wiped the slate clean 1,000 times more than it needed to in order for me to understand, wow, there's really something here that I hadn't thought about. And I guess for most people, that's quite early on in their lives that the breath becomes that significant. And I deal with a lot of people in their 70s and 80s that have never actually understood the true value of what the breath brings us. So I know, I'm guessing at least, that some people until the last breath won't realize how significant a thing it is that's been under their noses all this time. So facilitating, well, really being a breathwork facilitator and teaching other people how to facilitate breathwork is more a lesson of life than a lesson of breath, because the breath, we are pretty good at that. We pretty much know we can count on our breath until we can't. So I'm not going to be able to teach people how to breathe in and how to breathe out, although there are some technical aspects, but they're really minuscule in comparison with what happens to our consciousness and our awareness when we choose to breathe. And that is both on a physiological level and goes up all the way through the emotional, the psycho-emotional, the psycho-spiritual, and even the spiritual. So the breath, I think, is our most thorough metaphor for life. How people breathe is how they live. And that's not just a metaphor, it's also true. If you breathe a, a short, sharp breath, you're more prone to be anxious or to suffer from panic attacks. And if you breathe a longer, slower breath, you're more likely to be a calm observer of life. And uh, we also say when people are in what I call the breath state, which is a transformed state of awareness because of breathing a certain breath pattern, that then the way we breathe also becomes the way we live. So people who breathe with vigor tend to approach life with vigor. People who breathe almost like you can't see that they're breathing are people that generally are a little bit more hidden from life and less outspoken and more withdrawn from life. And so these metaphors really do count. And both in the breath state and out of it in normal life, I see how really how relevant they are, how they help me understand all the conditions that we live in as human beings.
Mm, mm. I love how you just talked about the conditions that we live in. So I think we don't realize, depending on where you are located, whether that is in like the Western culture or the Eastern, that the breath then changes in your environment and your surroundings. Can you touch on that in terms of, I mean, the truth is not everybody can leave and travel somewhere where they're at their most calm, but how can they then bring that into their present moment if they're in like a busy city, or especially if they're working in an environment that is really fast paced and a little bit stressful? How can they then bring that within? Because for me, it's always within, it starts within and then goes outwards.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it begins with one breath. And, one breath is probably 80% of the task in a way, um, because it involves a choice to take that one breath when we might feel under pressure or that there isn't time. We feel rushed or hurried. And that one breath is actually also historically what we lost when we were traumatized in our past. And most of that is in our childhood, but that would also apply for afterwards. When you've been shocked, you tend to catch your breath, right? And that's when the trauma would lodge in the body. It then becomes embodied. So the choice to take one breath is a major choice for a number of reasons. Number one, because we lost our breath when we were traumatized, but we also lost our choices and we became victims of that trauma. And the only way out of that state of victimhood is to be able to make fresh choices. An example of this would be a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist who went to welcome Syrian refugees off the boats in Lampedusa. And her practice was to congratulate people on arrival and to remind them of the series of choices they had to make in order to prevail, in order to survive, when some people on the boat had died on that journey. And it was an extraordinarily painful and challenging journey. It was discovered that the people that she welcomed to land, because she was congratulating them and acknowledging them for the victories that they'd attained, they were the people that reintegrated the most quickly.
Mm,
So this speaks, I think, to the need to make choices to feel like we've got more of a handle on life. And so an analogy for that would be, rather than sitting in the back of the taxi, letting some nutcase drive you and bounce you about around in the back of the car, that, by making a series of choices, we can actually climb into the front seat and take the wheel ourselves. And it doesn't stop things happening in our outer world, but it does mean that we can co-create with the outer world. It means that we can navigate, we can steer, we can accelerate, we can slow down. We have our fundamental life choices back with us again. That choice to make one breath is doing exactly that, because in that space of one breath, we can choose to take another or another 10, however many we need in that moment to develop a more ample view of the particular experience that we're engaged in that moment. And that could be the most threatening experience, or it could be the most enlightening, joyful experience. It could be making love. It could be anything that we go through in our day. When we bring a conscious breath to it, it will become polished in some way. It will become more clear as to why we're experiencing that. So I think a conclusive statement would be to say that a measure of our emotional intelligence or a measure of our emotional resilience is actually the ability to take a breath when you don't want to. And when I'm asked, well, okay, I suffer from anxiety. When I'm anxious, how should I breathe? I would respond, well, I can teach you how to breathe when you're feeling anxious, but actually the time you want to practice it is when you're not anxious. The time to put these practices into place is when you don't actually need them. And you may think of it as kind of cleaning up your toolkit. So when you reach into your toolkit, you know where to find the breath. Whereas if you don't practice it, you won't think of it as being in your toolkit. You'll just get into the stress and stay motivated by the rise of adrenaline and cortisol and epinephrine that we experience when we feel tension. So I think that those are the two. Number 101, 102 is number 101 is learn how to take a breath when you don't feel to. And the second one is make sure your breath practices are in place so when you need them, you can really count on them.
Mm. I love how you're saying it's the importance of keeping the consistency and not only taking it out in an emergency because you want to make it be a part of your everyday life rather than that quick tool that you use in that one moment and then you kind of almost revert back to we would say the regular breath rather than I guess what you're saying is also co-creating with the body and the consciousness to work together so that it's a continuous thing and not something that we use every so often.
Yeah, exactly. And everything gets better with the breath anyway. So, why not? Why not learn that the breath is actually our most intimate friend? It's our source of life force. It's our source of spiritual force, of being spirited, becoming spirited human beings in the sense of joie de vivre, the joy of life, but also in the more ethereal realms, more spiritually connected, because we use the word inspire frequently, but we don't often associate that with the importation of spirit, inspire in spirit. So for those who have more lofty concerns, it's a great way to navigate those realms too.
Mm. I love how you mentioned that part in terms of being inspired, but also working in spirit. When you started your journey, because you said that you started at the age of 8, was this something that you were just paying attention to as you continued through life? Or was it something that because I have spoken to a lot of people that have either gone into healing work and they said it started as a young age, but then, life happened and then something had them return back, right? You remembered. And then as an adult, then started to shift and change and then saying, you know what? I need to now share this with others. I need to share this with the world. So can you touch a little bit on your journey?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It was a point of reference. It was definitely a moment of enlightenment. Um, and it was a momentary experience and a very valid point of reference because it kind of, my life up till then, as I said, hadn't been a happy life. Our family wasn't really a family that stayed together. It was more looking outward, and both my parents worked very hard. This was back in the 50s. And so there wasn't much of a home life. And this taught me that as much as I missed, as much as I yearned for my mom, and as much as I felt abandoned or alone, this taught me that there was something far, far, far more wonderful, spectacular, reassuring, supportive that existed that was beyond all these things that I thought were the ideals that I actually needed. So it really became a very firm reference point, and I used to play with the breath a lot and explore with my friends and try understand, have this experience again and understand more about it. But as you say, life did happen. And I myself became a parent when I was very young. I was just 18 when my son was born. And I quickly became a single parent. Um, and I had to live. I was living in the States. I had to survive. So I definitely went wholeheartedly into creating material wealth so I could provide for my son. And at the same time, throughout that whole period, I was still very spiritually curious. And the breath to me was one of the ways that I could meet that curiosity by achieving that state of oneness that I experienced when I was 8 by seeking to find it again. And actually, when my first son was born, I coached my wife with breath practices throughout the pregnancy. So we did get to work with it consciously, but I never thought that that would be what I do. And actually, I think there's a paradox here because you called me a breath facilitator, but I think actually really where the work is from my perspective, and certainly from the people I train, from their perspective, is that really what we're facilitating is life. And
Mm.
we use the breath as a way to make life easier. So the paradox is that it's actually about when you're not in a breath session, how do you integrate it and how do you implement it functionally to create sustainable change in your life? So, how do we meet things like those parts of the human condition that we don't celebrate so much, and we'd like to celebrate more those parts of ourselves that may be hidden behind the traumas we've suffered. How do we feel the feelings that we associate with threat, like fear and anxiety and anger? How can we manage those by actually creating relationship with them rather than letting them be some hidden occult force behind us, pushing us forward into life with these terrible conditions that are part of the human experience that we see on the international stage every day. So for me, this facilitation is about how can I help people develop an alternative conversation than the polarized conversations that we see existing on the planet today.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love how you touched on the emotional piece of people suppressing their emotions, but how it ties into the breath. And we actually might not even realize that the way that we're breathing can be because of those experiences. So, what could you say to people out there who have experienced trauma, which we've all experienced trauma, and are still having a hard time releasing that and letting that go? How do you then incorporate that into the breath? Because it sounds like the important thing is to pay attention to the breath, but also then to start asking questions to the body and saying, like, well, where's that coming from? Why am I breathing in those ways? And how can I then address those things and hopefully release and let it go and finding what sounds like a fresh breath? Taking
Yeah,
that, like, you take a like a fresh breath of or fresh air, like breath of fresh air kind of thing.
yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful way of putting it too. I think I'm going to take a breath. Mm. So the bold statement is that I don't have a lot of faith in trauma release, first of all.
Mm,
I have colleagues that work with trauma release, and we have trauma release exercises um, that we use also at Alchemy. But to me, what I'm more concerned about is the part of me or the part of the person I'm working with that was traumatized. What happened to the person behind the trauma? And uh, one thing we know about trauma is that each time it happens, we begin to fragment our wholeness. And in order to not remember the pain of the incident, we tend to also throw out the baby with the bathwater. We actually don't, we dissociate from that part of us that suffered the trauma. So I would differentiate my approach to trauma from most in that what I'm interested to do is to rescue and reunite with the person that got wounded, to give that person the reassurance and the confidence and the protection they need in order to join back into wholeness with the conscious being of the moment, and then to continue life that way. So then trauma really becomes more of a teacher, and and an entity with which I want to become familiar from this place as I get stronger and stronger and I incorporate these parts of who I am back into wholeness. I get more full and rich as a human being. That empowers me then to look at the trauma from a more ample perspective, because there's more of me here. So then I can, again, another bold statement, even get to the point of thanking my abuser, because without that having happened, I wouldn't have been able to grow as much as I have in life. And I think Mo Gadat, who I believe was the chief something officer of Google, when he did a study on happiness, he did a research project of 12,000 people and offered to erase their trauma. I'll wipe your trauma completely clear. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And when questioned, about 99% of people said, no, I'll keep the trauma. Because if you lose the trauma, you lose the growth, you lose the relationships you created as a result of it, you lose your power of resilience, you lose your ability to become more robust and strengthen. So, in the final analysis, do we actually want to get rid of this? The kind word is to release it, but a lot of people say, I just want to get rid of my trauma. And it's like when you whack your finger with a hammer and you shake your finger, which is the worst thing you can do, right? Because it's going to send all the blood to the end of your finger. So I think we need to kind of turn the telescope around and look at this, instead of being this micro dot of scene that we're looking at, to actually expand it and enlarge it. And here's an example. I was just working with someone doing some inner child work with them yesterday. He's a highly successful businessman, just had an exit, entrepreneur, had an exit from a company, doing very well, reconsidering his life. And I said, what's the problem you would like to work with? And he said, I don't feel safe, never have. And I went, wow, that's big. Gives me goosebumps now, actually, as I even reflect on it. You've lived 53 years and you've never felt safe. And he said, yeah. And I said, so that's actually informed everything you've done in your life. You have never felt safe. And he went, yeah. And I said, well, when did that start? He said, well, I was born into an argument. It was never safe. This goes back to when I was a little, just a newborn. And then I suggested, well, perhaps even before, during the pregnancy, there were things going on that were troubling for you while you were in the womb. And he said, yeah, absolutely. It was a hostile environment that I was conceived into and born into. So as we worked together, we didn't need to focus on the trauma. What I needed to do was to get him to understand that this feeling safe actually doesn't belong to him today as a 53-year-old adult. It belongs to a part of him that he left behind when he was freshly born because it was too uncomfortable to remember. And that's developed this feeling that now belongs to all of him. It seems like it belongs to all of him, but actually there's something we can do. And if I can get him to not over-identify with this part of him that feels the feeling. And Dan Siegel said something very beautiful. He said, if you can recognize that you're separate from yourself, then you can bring yourself back together. But until you do, you can't do that. And so the first part of this bridge process that I use is about that recognition that this is a part of me that's separate from me today. And the paradox is that it's also dominating my life today. And I'm allowing it to. And I'm at some point inside expecting someone else to make me feel safe. I'm exporting my own ability to make myself feel safe to an outer world. So that could be a coping mechanism of any kind, the wrong kind of relationship, seeking a father figure, a mother figure, taking suppressants or mind modulators of some kind, addictions, habits. This guy was really well built. He works in a gym every day. He works out in order to protect himself from. And so he's lived his whole life that way, and it became so clear. So as we worked together and we achieved the understanding of this actual separation that existed, then we could work on a communication between these two entities. The conscious 53-year-old who's willing to do his inner work, and that tiny little tot that he once was, that was totally innocent but not safe, and learned that that was normal. So we begin a re-education process and a reassurance process that actually, I'm here to protect you now. I'm going to take care of you. It's up to me now. I've got your back, and I'm sorry you've suffered long enough. I'm going to make sure that you're taken care of. And so we went through that process together, and we put some exercises in place. And I just came to this meeting with you from having a follow-up with him, and I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I'm rocking. We're having a lot of fun together now. We
Mm,
just played in the swimming pool together. We're dancing together. We're doing things that are celebrating this new sense of unity that we have." And so that's why I say it's not really about the trauma. It's about rescuing the person that was traumatized and
mm,
reasserting the choices that they can make in order to stay that way, to stay healthy and whole.
mm. Very important piece that you just put in there, and I appreciate that. And I hope the listeners pay attention to it, is that fragmented piece that so many of us carry and we don't even realize, right? We're very much in our thoughts, and all of the stories that have happened, all of the experiences, and we created into this huge bubble of like a movie. And in that process, then we become that particular character and we take that from childhood into adulthood. And we actually don't realize the moments where in other relationships or experiences that we're still going through those same motions. Just like you said, for him, he never felt safe. And so his whole life, he felt that way in this character, and yet somehow was still able to function. My question would be, when we talk about those fragmented pieces, so many of us, just like you said, we look outside of ourselves for people to validate or to help us to make sense of those fragmented pieces. We hope that that could be the fix, right? Whether that is a person, a situation, or an addiction. I know you're saying that it's not so much about the breath, but how do you then find ways to incorporate that for somebody who's never done something like this?
Yeah.
They only are going through what they're feeling, right? I'm sure that this young man that came to you, or this man that came to you, was going through something and had a pinnacle moment, just like what we've all been through. And I finally said, I'm willing and ready to make the choice and the decision, but I don't really know how to start that. And especially when we talk about the breath, it's not something that we solely focus on, but it is something that's clearly important in order for us to be able to live this new life that we want to live, or a fresher version of what we are thinking or experiencing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I mean, the breath is fundamental to all of this. And in fact, the word bridge, it's an acronym, and it begins with the word breath. So I would always ensure that the person that I'm working with is willing to breathe throughout this experience. And that might sound a little useless as a question to someone who's kind of, I breathe my whole life. What do you mean, am I willing to breathe? But I actually mean to lend your awareness and your consciousness to your breath. Because when we do that, that's when the alchemy actually begins, is when we bring consciousness and breath together. We have the power to regulate or dysregulate our nervous system. We have an influence over our nervous system. And so breathing in certain ways, we can create certain effects. So if I'm speaking with someone and they're willing to breathe as we go through, for example, this process, if I find that they're too agitated or over-identified with this part that's been fragmented, then I would encourage them to take a calming, soft breath. This man was a successful businessman and a chest breather, someone who's like, I've got, he's pushing his chest out into the world. I've got a grasp of life. Control is what makes everything work. And so with him, I had him breathe a conscious, connected breath, which is um, a breath that has no pauses between the top of your inhalation and the bottom of your inhalation, and it has an effect of increasing the oxygen in your bloodstream. Your carbon dioxide levels drop, and actually slowing down oxygen flow to the frontal lobe. So it helps us interrupt those repetitive thoughts, that the cyclical ones, that the motor mouth, the monkey mind, as many call it, slows it down a bit so you can begin to pay attention in different ways, so you can begin to notice in different ways. But it also, another benefit of this breath is that it opens us more to our emotional realms. So for someone who, like, he was not identified, when I asked him, what would you like this kid to know? He was like, well, he can make it, he's got to survive, and I was like, well, okay. If you can imagine a little 0-year-old lying in a crib and you lean over him and point your finger at him and say, well, you just got to make it, buddy. That's not going to work. So what would a language be that would help him understand that he felt safe? Because that's what you're here to do, is to provide that safety. And so with a few powerful connected breaths, you could see his protections begin to melt, his questioning of the value of protection, his entering into vulnerability, his focus becoming more his heart than his head. And it was a bit jerky because he was a more challenging person to work with, but it always works. The breath, I've never known it not to do what it needs to do. So I'm not in any concern at all. And then, of course, sure enough, you get the penny drops and he gets it. Oh yeah, I'm now the protector, not the accuser. I need to be
Mm.
the protector of this little one. Um, so there's a whole range of breath you can use. There's that one breath that I said is the beginning of everything, the 101. 102 is to actually notice how you breathe in any different circumstance, and to keep at least a mental catalog, if not actually a written one, because that then becomes the manual that you can use in your life to use the breath to change your condition and create the kind of condition that you want. And then we move onwards to a conscious connected breath, which is more of perhaps a pivotal and life-changing moment. These sessions of conscious connected breath are the ones that people call them miracles sometimes. Some very unexpected things can happen, and they can be life-changing. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Thank you. What made you start the alchemy of breath?
I started the Alchemy of Breath in about 2011, I think. I was living in Bali. I I kind of had this very successful business in Italy. I used to restore old buildings. I was involved in architecture and made stacks of cash, and then just like didn't feel happy. So I moved to Asia. I moved to India first for 4 years, and I meditated and studied in India with the sages. And then I moved to Bali for the next 3 years and continued as a hermit studying and kind of letting the A train slow down and come to a stop. I'd been pushing so hard that I needed to create a break. So I did, and then I stayed on in Bali, and I founded a restaurant there called Alchemy, which now has branches in Tokyo and Dubai and a couple of other places in Bali as well. And then I got very ill. I didn't know what it was, but I was very close to death myself. And I was in a condition where I couldn't do anything but breathe. I couldn't move. I could only talk with the greatest pain. I couldn't cough. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't tense any muscle anywhere in my body. And I had to learn to be really still. And that was an extended period of time. That was about 7 or 8 weeks that I needed to be absolutely still. And I had to breathe just enough to survive, because if I couldn't breathe like that, it would have hurt. So I had to sort of like sip at this essence of life. Wow, I would invite anybody to do that for 7 or 8 weeks and see what kind of contemplations that encourages, because I got to strip away everything. I got to strip away all the accomplishment that I'd done, all the spiritual egotism I had created as a 7 year sitter, a meditator. I got to strip all sense of purpose away. And I'd actually already begun teaching breath work by then, but I realized I can't teach it that way. This isn't about me changing people's lives. I began to understand that this is a bit like being a priest or something. This is a vocation, and this is a life of service. And so it's not about big businesses or anything like that. It's about showing up and helping people to understand the value of this extraordinary thing that we've taken for granted our entire lives. And so I began, and of course, the irony was, as soon as I did begin, I developed a huge following, and we became the most successful training institution in the world. And we've got like 2,000 of our facilitators in over 70 countries. And, it's been an amazing journey. But I can honestly say that the bigger that it gets, the smaller I become, because it's just so humbling to see these people who are committed to helping other people. It moves me to tears, and to think of the help that people are getting and the life changes that are happening as a result of this. I'm just in service and more and more committed every day.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that piece about coming to the stillness, because we do very much get caught up in the everyday world and the materialism of what is happening around us. And we do feel this need of wanting to keep up. And we look at success as being what it is that we attain. And we don't realize that there are those moments of stillness where, even in the stillness, when we feel as if we're not doing enough, we are doing as much as we're supposed to in that moment. And for hopefully for people, they will continue. We are seeing it now. People are waking up to that more. They're wanting more of that and realizing that even with everything that they have attained, they're still seeking more. And it could absolutely be that fragmented self waking them up and nudging them and saying, like, you forgot about this piece of me, this piece of yourself that I really need for you to kind of bring forward so that you can be your whole. When it comes to those who are older, because you did say that you work a lot with older people,
Mhm.
what is the main reason why they come to you? Because I always feel like we go through stages of our lives from zero all the way up to like 100. And in that, we go through different experiences in those moments. And they always say that as you get older, that changes your perspective, changes about life. Probably a lot of the time it's because now your children are grown. And so now you're not thinking about how it is that you have to take care for them in those ways, which then allows you to put that focus back into yourself and allows you to open up to this new way of thinking. So, Can you explain more or touch on that a little bit more about those who are a little bit older who come to see you?
Yeah, I think I love how you describe this. You're touching upon the arc of a human lifetime, um, and of course we can only have the perspective that we have achieved so far. We can't have a future perspective. We can't foresee how we will perceive. We can only perceive the fullness of what we can perceive in this moment and what we've perceived in the past. So I think that's such a relevant thing for younger people too to know. And by the way, I work with 25-year-olds and 20-year-olds as well. So I deal with all ends of life. And the way I teach, I love to have them meeting in the same space because I see them teach each other and I can kind of sit back and like, yes, this is real. This is amazing to see. But I think one thing that's particular to our journey as elders is that we're inquiring into what is it that lies beyond mastery. And I think the perspective of someone in the first half of their life is that mastery is the pinnacle of accomplishment. To be at the top of my game is to be the top of the world. And yet that's when we're still in that sort of unconditional, expansive yang phase of reach and grasp and effort and striving and all of those things. And the last half of life is like, well, okay, actually, the destination here is the final exit. So, what does that map look like? And what are the cardinal points? Where are the rest stops on this highway? And where are the viewpoints? And what's this going to look like for me? And so what I'm finding, of course, is I because I can't really perceive beyond my own age in a way, but I have worked with many, many people that are older than I am. So in a sense, like someone who's studied near-death experiences but might not have had one themselves, there's a lot of data that I've been able to accumulate. But what I sense are the major thresholds that we contend with. Um, First is a statement my brother made when before he died several years ago. He said to me, "Why is it that what people boast about in the first half of their lives are things that they need to keep secret in the last half of their
Mm,
lives?" So that kind of gives us a sense of, okay, a sense of gravitas, like, oh, something else is, there's a period of accountability that I remember being taught as a young Christian. I'd be on the scales, when I died, I'd be on the balance and the good things I did and the bad things I did. Um, but I think there's definitely truth to that. And so what I notice is not just how do I elegantly dismantle the prowess that I've used to get where I got in life, but how do I actually dismantle all attachment to life?
mm,
And what are the signposts? What are the towns, the issues in my life that I need to visit on that pathway to my exit? And that's what I write about in my book. It's a whole human journey from birth to death, but this particular part is I'm very fond of it because it's the part I'm in now. So that looks like atonement. What is there in my life I need to take responsibility for? I think we've all been hurt in our lives, and we know that hurt people hurt people. So who are the people that I hurt? And what does making amends look like? What does being at peace with the fact that I've hurt people? What does forgiving myself look like? Um, what is forgiveness? This is a huge subject, and it's more than we're told about in the scriptures. The scriptures are a little cryptic, no matter which scripture you look at. But this is much more multi-dimensional in a modern day, and in the modern day, and how can I be usefully contemplate these things with with an outcome in mind, with an outcome of achieving a sense of inner peace before I take my last breath. And I think those are the two major thresholds to be crossed in these years. And another one, of course, is to reevaluate the quality of the treasure that I've created, obtained, accumulated in the first half of my life. What are they actually worth? And if we look at Joseph Campbell's work with the hero's journey, you find the treasure and you're out in the middle of nowhere on a treasure island. It's not really very useful. You can't trade it. It shines, but you can't trade it for anything that, like food or something that's valuable. So this last half of life is really about the return. And how do I bring the real quality of that treasure in me back to where I came from? So back to where I began this outward journey of departure and experimentation and exploration and prevailing and mastery, and then this path through mystery. How can I embrace it? And I think a very significant quote from someone who's world famous and has been for a couple of thousand years, which was, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I think that has value in this stage of life, of understanding that, oh, I didn't know those certain people. I didn't know. I've blamed myself my whole life, and I've found ways to hide from the truth that I did this. I might have dissociated from it or whatever, but it's okay. Actually, I didn't know what I was doing, and I am forgivable for everything that I've done, no matter how extreme it might have been. There's a beautiful story about a lady in South Africa whose daughter, she lost her daughter because of, before the ANC, which was a political group in South Africa, was legitimized. There was a lot of terrorism about, and a general of the, I can't remember, the rebellious army ordered for her daughter to be blown up in a restaurant. It wasn't personal. It was, they wanted to blow up the restaurant or the shop or school or wherever they were. And this beautiful film that you can see on YouTube is about this woman asking for his forgiveness. So put that in, goosebumps again, put that in your pipe and smoke it. What does forgiveness really mean? And when I ask people, who are you withholding forgiveness from in your life? Because this was my lesson, and I write about this in the book. Whoever I've withheld forgiveness from is ultimately from whom I need forgiveness. Because I don't actually, as a human, I don't have the right to withhold forgiveness. That's a divine right. And I can't put myself in a position of the divine to withhold forgiveness from someone. And not forgiving is actually stopping life. It's stopping things from, it's stopping flow. So I think as we make our way to our last breath, these are some of the contemplations that we face. And we want to get good at this. The idea is that for our last breath, we can pick the tree we sit under and say, today's a good day to die, and I'm ready. I'm ready to leave. So I'd love to make that a success story for people too, that we can be at peace with ourselves when that moment happens.
So beautifully said. So beautifully said. We all, at the end of the day, want to find that peace. And a lot of the times, like what you said, we hold on to a lot of things that and we keep it secret, right? We keep it secret all the way up until our last breath. And a lot of the times we have seen that people then share a lot of those things before they cross over, which is always very interesting too. Um,
Yeah.
what would you say then to those who have lost someone in those moments? Because I do feel like when people lose people, as much as those people have crossed over and now a lot of them are at peace, those who are still on earth are still grappling with that. And in those moments when they lose someone that they care for and love for, it's almost like moment of them stops, or that breath then stops, right? We're still breathing, but like what you said, in that traumatic moment, piece of them just halts in that spot, and their breath almost we hold, it's like we hold our breath, hoping that we'll be able to breathe again, a sigh of relief through something. So what would you say to those people?
Well, again, I mean, first of all, I want to be compassionate to this place because it's, I think, one of the most beautiful things in life when we lose a loved one, that the insistence of grief feels like a request to dwell in a very real space. And that's if we can, a lot of our experience in grief is self-pity, which is probably not going to help us in the longer term. So if we're able to identify that a part of it is self-pity, but beyond that, really inhabiting this space deeply and quizzically, consciously and curiously, with curiosity, I feel that it has so much to yield in terms of guiding us to living the way that we want to, and we may have forgotten. And I think the paradox in this is that someone's departure always brings a gift. It always brings a gift of a realization that we couldn't have had if they were there because we were engaged in
Mm,
perhaps thought patterns or conversations or arguments even, or concerns. And once there's no purpose for those concerns anymore, or all the momentum we might have maintained to be in relationship with them is all of a sudden of no value. So in that emptiness, it feels that there's a huge potential for deeper understanding of who we are. And I certainly, in my experience of all the loved ones that I've lost, there's been a huge gift left behind.
mm,
And yeah, I could make light of it and say, my
mm.
one of my most difficult relationships was with my mum, but since she died, I've won every argument ever since. So, for those who are kind of stuck with families that they're not enjoying,
Right.
just think yeah, you can all be revisited. And I love the idea that I trust that she is now all knowing. She's returned to a place of
Mm,
all knowing. And in a way that exposes to me parts of myself that were in argument with her that actually don't need to be there either. It's taught me things
mm,
about myself. So I think that passing of somebody is actually a divine blessing in a way. Even though it's heart-wrenching. I mean, we have a woman at our retreat right now who lost her son to suicide, and so I really don't want to make light of these things. These are devastating parts of our human experience, but I do feel that we need to regain choice, even in the pit of that feeling like we're a victim of something. And the one choice we can do is to explore this thoroughly, not to be self-indulgent or to wallow, but to really become the detective of our experience. And I think that makes us bigger hearted people that we can. This is what I teach my students too, because then when you meet someone who's in dire trouble like that, like this beautiful English lady that I've been with recently, that I can be alongside her. I'm not dwarfed by the depth of her experience. I can be there. Yeah, I've got you. I'm with you. I want to be here and ask you questions about it and nose in there. And how many of us are so lonely in our grief because
mm,
no one else can understand. It's no point even trying to explain to you what's going on. I can hardly put words on it myself, and you're going to assume something or go in the wrong direction with it, and or say get over it, or that's one of the most horrid things we can hear when we're in a state of grief, is for someone to say, look, it's been 2 years, don't you think you should get on with life? It's like, oh, how insensitive can that be? So I think that as with every phase of life, and I think this is particularly important with the breath, Each in-breath we're taking is a replication of that first breath we ever took that was completely unconditional and all-encompassing and totally curious and unknowing and innocent. And each exhale we make is a preparation for that final breath. Let's practice. Let's practice this consciously because it helps us let go of sticky things in our lives. It stops us trying to cling on to life when it wants to flow. And it's ultimately a preparation for an easy exit. And my God, it might be the best journey we've ever taken. So let's hold space for that rather than be in fear of it.
I love that. Holding space for it instead of being in fear of it, because so many of us are still in fear of it. However, I do feel that times are changing, and with so many healers and practitioners out there, and with social media being able to help people awaken to that, I think that's a very beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah.
show us or share one breath practice that people could use if they've never done a practice? Because the truth is, I've asked a lot of people, I love to meditate. That's something where I find I can calm my breath. But a lot of people are like, Rashida, I can't even sit for like 2 seconds without needing to get up or having thoughts run through my head. um, to have one practice that they could hopefully take with them and use, even if they might be thinking, this isn't going to work, but at least give it a try because whether we realize it or not, it will change in some little way.
Very simple one. It's called the coherence breath. And you're going to breathe in for a count of five through your nose and out for a count of five through your nose. And if you like, we can practice a few together so you can see if you can find the right rhythm. Would you like to do that? Would that be helpful?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Okay. So let's try. So we're going to inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. And exhale, relax. Sounds so
Yeah,
simple, isn't it?
it is. Sounds very simple. I can say for myself, as I did the first breath, and I'm sure a lot of people can attest to this, when you take your first 5 breaths, I noticed within mine, it stopped. So it's almost like it stopped and then you went down. But on the second one, it felt more of a smoother. So it's almost like every time we're doing it, it's deepening the breath, giving way for more breath to come in and out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And it also becomes more familiar, so we get more confident. I mean, usually at first, like people, oh, I'm already full, and you've counted to four, and oh, I've still got left, and you're down to, down to five. So it takes a little bit to adjust, and that's the first stage. The next stage is to consider it a practice and do it 3 times a day for 5 minutes if you can. So set a clock. And if you can just say into your telephone, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do it for 5 minutes. So then you to record it for 5 minutes, then you can just listen to it and you don't have to think about anything. After a while, you'll find that you can do it automatically. And after about a week, if you manage to maintain it for a week, you'll find that you'll go to that breath whenever you feel dislodged in any way. You'll just automatically go to it. And if you keep it up for 3 weeks, you'll find that it'll be, instead of your go to breath, it'll be your come from breath. So you'll just end up going through your day breathing with that type of breath pattern. And what that's going to do is it's going to increase your heart rate variability, which makes your heart more able to adjust to different loads or stresses that you take. So it's going to increase your heart health. And it's also going to give you a link to equanimity. So when things go pear-shaped out there, you can just come back to your own rhythm and know that this is actually a human rhythm. It's a human rhythm we all share. My gosh, one last hint. My wife and I have an agreement. It's in our wedding contract that we have the right to say to each other, I want to take 10 breaths with you. Even if we're in the middle of something really challenging where we just want to say things you really don't want to say, kind of thing, we can say, okay, I want to call upon the 10 breath contract. And we take 10 breaths and we look at each other. And I promise you, by the time you get to the end of that 10th breath, you've made it. Your relationship
Mm,
is safe, and you'll find a
mm.
safer way to communicate. So,
I love that. I'm gonna have to use that one. Definitely. Thank you so much, Anthony. Before I let you go, I would love just for you to like share everything because I know you said you had a book. I know our listeners love to read, so please, if you can share that and share where people can find you and connect with you. Like, you have such a beautiful website. So, literally, guys, like, I'm going to put all his information down below and you can click and check and find ways to connect literally from all over the world, which I think is a beautiful thing. So, yeah, go ahead and share.
thank you. The book is called Outer Chaos, Inner Calm, and it's on Amazon. It's already a bestseller,
Mm,
so help keep it that way if you can. I'd be grateful.
yeah.
I think you'll enjoy it. It talks about what we've talked about, but goes deeper. And it's a bit easier to get traction from the book than it is just a quick conversation. There's also an opportunity in the book to join a community of other people that are reading it. So in community, we can help each other. You can share your wins and share your challenges, which is helpful. People are saying is really helpful. And to find out more about what we do, you can come to alchemyofbreath.com. And do know you're invited to breathe. Every Sunday, we do free breathwork sessions online. There are several hundred people in this community, and they'd love to welcome you. We all breathe together. We've got our star facilitators that come there. My wife and I, Amy, my wife and I come and do it once in a while too. And it's a wonderful time to share space, to commit to a weekly ritual that will undoubtedly help you feel better, feel more at peace, more creative, and very likely resolve issues that might be there for you today. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of that because I know my listeners love to check out different modalities and practices. And this is another way to do it, especially from the comfort of your home if you're a busy person like myself. So I do enjoy that. And thank you. I look forward to also getting your book um, and sharing that with others as well. Thank you so much, Anthony, for all of your amazing wisdom and gems that you shared, as well as with the beautiful practice, that beautiful technique. I look forward to continuing to add that into my everyday, and I know everybody else will too. So thank you once again, Anthony. I appreciate it.
bless you, Rashida. Bless all you listeners. And one final request is go do a random act of kindness today.
Mm, I
Right?
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is the Ultimate Human Experience Podcast. We are out. Peace.